Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome back to Curious About the Human Body for our final session of the day. We are here today with Kirsty Early, who is the Digital Heritage and Engagement Officer at the Royal College of Physicians and Surgeons in Glasgow. Hello, Kirsty. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Hi, how you doing? Is it all right?
I'm doing fantastic. How are you?
Yeah, doing grand. Happy it's a Friday and buzzing to be here.
Brilliant. So I heard you have a presentation all about the history of germs ready for us today.
Yes, I do. I'm going to tell you the really fascinating story of the history of germs and how Glasgow's involved in it as well, which is pretty cool.
That sounds fascinating. Please tell us everything you know.
Oh gosh, right. How long do you have? No, I'm joking. Right, so let me get started. So I want to say hi to everyone. As it was introduced, I am Kirsty Early and I'm from the Royal College of Physicians and Surgeons of Glasgow. So that's a big title, but I'll explain all about us in a minute. And today, what I'm going to tell you is the story of germs and Glasgow's role in that story. Now, I'm sure over the past wee while you've heard a lot about germs and you know a lot about germs already, but I think it's really important that we keep talking about them. So, we're going to be looking at what germs are and how they were discovered and Glasgow's role in that story, which is really cool. But first of all, let me tell you about the college because it is a pretty weird name and you might not know what it does. So, the Royal College is an institute that helps to train up doctors and surgeons. Now, it's not university, it's what happens after university. So, I'm sure you know if you want to be a doctor, you want to be a surgeon, you have to go to university and get a degree. But after that, once doctors and surgeons get their degree, they have to keep training throughout their career for a long time. And that's where the college steps in. So what we do is we help to support their training and we help to make sure that they sit their exams and courses as well. And we've been doing it for quite a while. We've been doing it since 1599, which is over 400 years. And we've been supporting doctors and surgeons and other healthcare practitioners like dentists during that time. So supporting them in Glasgow, west of Scotland, but also all over the world. And through supporting them, we also support the patients that they treat, which is pretty cool. So because the college is so old, it's actually got a lot of history and a lot of Glasgow's history plays into it as well. But as I said, that is not what I'm talking about today. What I'm talking about is germs and how much you actually know about germs and we know about germs. So that's the question. How much do you know about germs? So first of all, we're going to look at what germs actually are. So what are germs? Well, germs are something in biology that we call microorganisms, which is a big fancy word, which basically means that germs are tiny living creatures. In fact, they're so tiny that we can't see them with the naked eye. We need special equipment in order to see them. So that special equipment is something called microscopes, which you see a picture of here on the screen. Now, some of you might have looked into a microscope before or even a telescope. It's really similar. Microscopes basically allow us to see a zoomed in version of what we're looking at. So we can look at something really small and get a really clear image. And that is what we can do with germs. We can put them on a slide and we can look at them under a microscope and see what they look like and how they behave. So that's what scientists and doctors can do to monitor germs. So that's what we can do now. So not to scare you, I don't want to scare anyone, but germs are everywhere. And they do have the ability to enter our bodies. So they're all around in the environment, all in the surfaces that surround us as well. But don't worry, there are some good germs out there. They're like the good guys in an action movie, the superheroes. So for example, we have germs inside us. We have germs in our digestive system, so like in our stomachs and in our intestines. And they help us to process the food that we eat. They help us to get the best out of the food that we eat, like the nutrients, all the good stuff. So they naturally live in our bodies and they are the superheroes. But as I said, with every superhero, there's going to be a villain, isn't there? So there are also bad germs out there. And if they get into our bodies, they can actually make us very sick. And in fact, we need protection from them to make sure that we don't get sick. So, how can germs pass from one person to another? Well, this can happen in a lot of different ways. You might have been told things from your parents like, oh, cover your mouth when you're coughing or wash your hands. It's because germs can be passed to other people in different ways. So they can be passed in the air in little tiny water droplets, like through coughing or through sneezing or even spitting. My gran always told me not to spit, and it was a dirty habit, and it's because germs could pass in that way. They can also be passed through physical touch, like shaking someone's hand or giving them a high five. Or even if you like to prepare food and cook food, they can be passed on through food that hasn't been cooked or prepared properly, so not with proper hygiene. So there's lots of ways that it can get passed from one person to another. But thankfully, the good news is our bodies are pretty amazing. And I'm sure you all know that already. And they are very strong. See, our bodies have natural defenses against germs and the diseases that they can cause because we have something in our bodies called an immune system. Now, this is the part of our body that acts like a shield against germs, and they have special cells in them to stop us from getting hurt from germs, essentially. So these cells, these immune cells, actually attack anything that they consider to be dangerous. And they remember the germs that we come into contact with so that in the future, if we meet those germs again, these immune cells know how to quickly react to the germs in our bodies. So our immune systems are pretty awesome. However, sometimes even our immune systems need help, and they need help against germs. And that's where doctors can step in and give us the proper help and treatment we might need, like in medication or even vaccines to help protect us against germs. So that's what we know about germs today. We know quite a lot, let's be honest. But has it always been this way? Have we always known how germs behave or what they even look like? Well, the quick answer is no, to spoil it. We've not always known this. And to understand this, we actually have to go into our imaginary time machine in our heads and go back 160 years to understand what it was like before we knew about germs. So what we're going to do is we're going to have a look at what Glasgow was like in the 1860s. So in the 1860s, that was the time machine, we're already back. Glasgow, just like other large cities in the United Kingdom, was overcrowded, it was dirty, and it was smelly. There was a lot of people that rushed to move to Glasgow because there was a lot of work there. But it doesn't necessarily mean that there was enough space for them to stay there. The streets and the housings, they were all covered with rubbish and filth and hygiene, you know, the things we do to make sure we stay clean. Well, that was pretty bad. So because hygiene was bad, diseases were really common and people got sick often. So these photos that you see on the screen, these are the photos of the Glasgow slums, and they were taken by a man called Thomas Annan. And these are the overcrowded parts of the city, like near the high street in the city centre. And it was where many people lived and were squeezed into really small tenement flats and small spaces. In fact, several families could share the same flat. So diseases were in the streets and they would spread through the city. But you might not believe this, they were also in the city's hospitals as well. As I said, hygiene was really bad at this time. And that was because scientists didn't really know as a fact that germs existed. It hadn't been scientifically proven yet. So this was partly because the use of microscopes, like we saw earlier, wasn't really common amongst people in medicine and surgery. And doctors and surgeons were actually really slow to trust new developments and new advancements in practice. So the hospitals were dirty. But even the clothes that doctors wore were dirty. They would usually just wear the clothes that they would wear out in the street. And these clothes would be covered in blood. And it was like a badge of honour for them to show how many patients that they had worked on and how many patients that they'd treated. As well as this, they didn't wash their hands. Can you imagine that? Doctors not washing their hands. So they didn't wash their hands between treating different patients. And as we saw before, that is how germs can pass from one person to another. So I'm not going to lie, it was pretty bad, and they needed someone to come sort out what germs were and figure it out. So that is where Joseph Lister steps into our story. So you see a picture of Joseph Lister there on the screen, quite a dapper young man there. So Lister was a surgeon in Glasgow, and he was working at the Glasgow Royal Infirmary in the 1860s. Now, some of you might have heard of the Royal Infirmary or have even been there. It's the big hospital in the city centre near the cathedral. So Lister was working there at this time, and he saw how unclean the wards were. But he also noticed that a lot of the patients he was treating were dying, not during surgical operations, but after, because they kept getting infections. And he was quite a well-read man, and he thought, maybe my patients are dying from this thing that I've heard scientists talk about, this thing called germs. So thankfully, Lister was one of the few surgeons who owned a microscope and performed his own research into this rumoured idea of germs. See, science is all about having an idea and putting it to the test, and that is exactly what Lister did. So he put it to the test. One of his patients was a young boy called James, and he'd unfortunately been run over by a horse and cart, so equivalent of getting run over by a car. And he'd broken his leg. And actually, the bone in his leg had pierced through the skin, which meant that his body, the inside of his body, was exposed to all the germs in the atmosphere. So Lister had to act fast. He set the fracture in his leg and decided to cover the wound with a solution of carbolic acid, so a special chemical. And his aim was to destroy any germs that might be present in the wound. So he continued to clean the wound in this way over several weeks, and he noticed that James wasn't getting infected. And that's something that he'd never seen before. So after several weeks of treatment, James actually made a full recovery and didn't get an infection. This was absolutely mind-blowing and was the start of what we now know today to be antisepsis. Now, you might have heard that word before. Antisepsis is the practice and everything that we can do to kill germs in the environment. So antisepsis was born in Glasgow, and it then led to proper hygiene in medicine and surgery. So that's the kind of things that we see doctors doing today. So doctors wear clean lab coats and gloves when they're performing operations or treating patients. And they also regularly wash their hands before and after this. This is all because of Lister's work that happened at the Glasgow Royal Infirmary. And that work helped to prove to people all over the world that germs actually existed and were causing people to die. His work has saved millions and millions of lives ever since, and is part of the reason as to why we understand what germs are today and how they work. And it all happened in Glasgow, which is pretty cool. So not only is it important that doctors and surgeons and people in hospitals have proper hygiene, it's important that we do our part too. So we can wash our hands regularly with soap or use hand sanitizer. We can cover our mouths when we cough or sneeze, or even wear masks to protect other people. And like when preparing food or meals, we can make sure that we have clean workspace and proper hygiene when we're doing that, so we don't pass germs on to other people. So that is what germs are, and that is Glasgow's role in the story. And that's me done my talk. Thank you very much, guys.
Thank you so much, Kirsty. That's such a cool, unique part of Glasgow history that, germ theory and the antiseptic principle all came from Glasgow.
I know. And I think it's something that not many people know about. So a part of our role at the college is to just keep talking about it.
I mean, you do it so well. So I think we have a couple of questions, and just a reminder to everybody watching along, you can send in your own questions. Please send in your own questions. Take advantage while Kirsty's still here. But we have a question, if we can just bring that up. So this is a question, it's one I wanted to know. Before we knew about germs, how did doctors explain why people got sick?
Oh my gosh, right, let me tell you. It's as if I was there. They had lots of different explanations, but it was never really fact. There was a lot of just kind of guesses. Doctors just guessed a lot, and a lot of what they did wasn't necessarily based on proper training. It was like tradition. So you think of some of the weird myths that you might hear. That was kind of pretty solid in medicine and surgery before the time of Lister. So if you go all the way back to like the ancient Greeks, and if you've ever heard of Hippocrates, there was a theory called the humoral theory. And it was basically the belief that people got sick because there was an imbalance in different levels in the body. So they might not have enough good blood, or they might not have enough phlegm or mucus in the body, so they got sick. That couldn't have been proven scientifically, and it was actually proven to be absolute rubbish. But then there was other ones that are a bit more mythical, like, oh, someone got sick because they had bad spirits in them, or like demons in them, and that they had to drill a hole in someone's head to get them out. That it was a lot of kind of just, I won't call nonsense, but it was nothing that could be proved properly. So that's kind of what they thought. There wasn't a one-way thing. People would just throw in more and more ideas and be like, yeah, that's probably it. That's fine. We'll figure out our own treatment. So there wasn't a solid thing. It would usually be a group of people thought this, but then another group of people thought something totally different.
So you could have doctors disagreeing on why they thought someone was ill, being like, I think it's ghosts. Well, I think it's bile.
Yeah, totally. Doctors love to argue with each other and like support their favorite person. So yeah, some of them are a bit crazy.
I'm glad that no longer when I go to my GP, it's like, you're just haunted. I am so sorry. Nothing we can do about that.
Depends on the GP, I bet. I bet you there's one out there.
You can find them. Do we have any other questions coming up? Yes. So why do some germs spread more quickly than others?
This one, I'm not an immunologist by any stretch of the word. I could take an educated guess, and that is some will just be more contagious than others. Some will just be easier to spread. Sometimes it might be the mode in which it spreads as well. But I think so. There will be some germs that are stronger than others, but a lot of the time as well, it's situational. So when I talked about the kind of living conditions in Glasgow, overcrowded places are really easy places for germs to spread. Where there's not a lot of good, for example, ventilation. Ventilation is actually really important for us to kind of get fresh air, and there's not a lot of space. So it's not necessarily always down to the strength of the germ or whether that germ can cause mutations or evolve. Sometimes it's actually, where do you live? And what is your practice as well of hygiene? So I don't think it's necessarily down to one thing. I think it's to use a big word, multifactorial. That was a word that I threw about a lot at university. Made me sound so smart. So yeah, I think it's a variety of things that means that certain germs can spread a lot easier. But especially if it's newer germs like we're seeing today, that maybe we've never been exposed to. That can cause, I'm sure we've all noticed, a big spread across the world.
So that's really interesting. So the difference between living conditions in Glasgow back then and Glasgow today, it's not just because it's more comfortable, it's safer and more hygienic for our health.
Yeah, and it's not to say, like, I'm from Glasgow, I love the city, but I will say it's still not necessarily the cleanest place in the world. But compared to what it used to be, I'm always like, we're doing pretty well. I'm not gonna lie. It's much better now.
All right, I think we have another question just coming up. So I think you talked about a little bit about this in your presentation, but I think we think about germs as like, these are the things that can get us sick. But what examples of good germs can you give me?
Well, I can't name them because they've all got these really big, fancy Latin names that no one can pronounce. But yeah, like I said in the talk, the ones that naturally kind of live in our stomachs to help us. So if you've ever seen that kind of special yogurts like probiotics or Yakult and all those adverts, I've never actually had one. But yeah, those little drinks you can get. There are good germs that kind of naturally live in our systems to help us to survive and actually have our bodies reach kind of peak performance. But it's important as well that we kind of replenish them. So that's what all these like little drinks are about, like that you keep supporting that system. I definitely don't do it enough. That's probably something I need to get onto. But yeah, there are good germs. It's that I think you're right in saying the word germ has kind of had this negative meaning put to it. And actually it's just like, no, there are good ones. There are ones that actually we shouldn't try and kind of avoid. But yeah, equally there are bad ones. So it's getting, I think your whole body and the system's all about getting that balance.
That's not, I mean, that's good to know. I think, yeah, you're right. The word germ is kind of like, oh, but if anybody watching would like to send Kirsty her first Yakult, you can just post to the Royal College of Physicians and Surgeons.
I mean, it's so good.
We'll sort that out for you. That's our gift for joining us today on the stream. I think we have time for a couple more questions. So here we have one. What did we learn from the work of Joseph Lister that's been applied during the pandemic?
Yeah, that's a really good question because it's so linked to what we're going through today. So it's not just the work of Lister. Obviously, what Lister is the one that I want to focus on because of Glasgow, but there was different work like the French chemist Louis Pasteur. He was a scientist, and also other people.
Is that where pasteurizing comes from?
Yes, that's all about his
Oh,
experimentations. Oh my gosh. Yeah, so he was like, it was kind of Lister and Pasteur kind of together along with other people that really solidified the germ theory. But what we've learned from his work is that chemicals can be used to kill germs, and just the general idea of cleanliness and the things that we can do to keep clean and prevent germs from being passed to other people is kind of what we learned from both Lister and Pasteur. So from Lister there was antisepsis, but then you've maybe heard of asepsis as well.
I actually haven't. Could you explain it to me?
I can't. Right, it's really hard to explain the difference. Let me say, I'll explain what I understand from a surgery point of view. Is that antisepsis was like germs were there already. We had to get rid of them. Asepsis is kind of like the complete avoidance of them completely. So asepsis is, if you've ever heard of doctors like boiling their instruments to sterilize them, that's all kind of asepsis, which part of we can't say this like with historical proof, but another Glasgow surgeon is actually said to have pioneered, a man called William McEwen, who was a student of Joseph Lister. He helped to pioneer. And even just stuff we see like wearing gloves, wearing masks, this is all kind of asepsis, which was born from antisepsis. So I don't want to be like big-headed here, but I would almost say kind of everything we do in the pandemic to avoid COVID-19 from passing to other people, you could argue is born from Lister's work. So yeah, the masks and just general cleanliness and hand sanitizer, the big one, is probably the most obvious one, is kind of all can go back to Lister, I would say. So I would say everything. Yeah, everything.
Yeah, so the whole COVID response.
Yeah, to put a short answer out there.
That's brilliant. Do we have any more questions coming up? So, what is the weirdest or was the weirdest Victorian remedy for an illness that you've heard of?
So my colleague Claire is actually probably better at answering this, but we do love a good weird remedy in the college in the heritage department. So I'll say the Victorians kind of had it sorted. I'm not going to lie. I'm a big fan of not in every aspect, but the Victorians I'm a big fan of because a lot of modern science, engineering and whatnot else kind of started in the Victorian era. So I would say modern medicine kind of started after Lister. He was the one to kind of finally get it sorted. So they didn't really have many weird remedies, I'm not going to lie. You have to go back a century earlier to about the 1700s. And you're looking at more kind of people who were doctors and surgeons in their rural communities and had remedies. So we have a book in the college from the 1700s. It's just a little tiny pocket book of remedies. We don't know who wrote it, but some of the remedies I can say from the top of my head that's in there is if you had back pain, you had to rub some poo on your back. Yeah, I'm not even joking. Or there's a lot of poo in that book. And if you had a nosebleed, you got some pig dung and put it up your nose to stop the nosebleed.
Was there a reason? Was there any context? Or was it someone just be like,
I would love to. It was just for the banter, and they're like, "Oh, bet someone's going to do this because I wrote it." No, I think it is. So in these communities, they probably would have been ready, available materials. Living with animals and stuff. But so when we talk about it, we see that it's really crazy remedy. But I sit there and try and rationale it, and I'm like, so for example, the pig dung up the nose. It's like, yes, that would smell awful, but it would stop the blood. You're kind of blocking the blood and causing coagulation. The back pain one, I cannot. I don't want to go into too much detail, but the warmth of the poo might have a soothing effect. So I would say it's not the Victorian remedies that are weird. You go 100 years earlier, and that's when it gets really weird.
Wow, I am glad that I am not living in the 17th century.
I bet you didn't expect me to talk about poo so much.
No, I can't say I did. I think we have time for just like one or two more questions just
If you
before
dare.
we sign off. If I did, do we even want to know more? We do. We always want to know more. So what are we still learning about germs?
I think what we're still learning about germs is how they behave and the variety. I think the great thing with science is it's an ongoing thing, and with medicine, we've never everything's evolving, and germs are evolving too. So if you look at COVID-19 alone, we've seen such a change in that and all the different strains and whatnot and how it behaves. So I would say it's more just maybe even the life cycle of germs of certain different germs is something that we're still learning. There's germs that we've not even met yet that we'll probably learn about too. And generally how they behave and how we can react to them and how we can treat them, for example, if they're bad, or how they can benefit us if they're good. So I think in a way we understand the basis of what germs are and how they are spread, and that understanding we didn't have before Lister, as I said. But we're still probably learning everything and anything about them as well, which is equally maybe scary, but equally exciting as well, I think.
So we've got a lot more to learn about germs.
I'm not gonna lie, we've got a long way to go.
We've got a long way to go. I think we have time for one last question. Again, thank you so much for joining us today. Our last question is, can you tell us a little bit about your career journey?
Right, you have the longest question answer left to the end. My career journey has been pretty weird. So my initial training's in anatomy, so that's how I kind of know so much about the structure of the body and how it works. I did that, and then I did a degree in medical visualization, which is basically an art degree, and how we can visually communicate medicine. And then I started working for the college through doing a project with them. I was really interested. I had a class on the history of anatomy, and that got me hooked and got a project there. So it's been if you find someone, because we're a museum, you talk to someone who works in the museum, they kind of just ended up there. And they're like, this is cool. And then it just kind of happened. So when people ask me like, oh, what was your career journey like? I was like, how much time do you have? It's a weird one. There's no straight line. But what I do at the college is do stuff like this, like talks, and I make videos to tell schools and different people about the college. So it's one of those, if you've heard the phrase happy stance journeys, where it's just happened and I'm kind of buzzing that it has.
I feel that greatly as someone who also works in science communication. Everyone's just like, well, I'm here now and I'm having a wonderful time. Thank you so much for joining us, Kirsty. That was such a cool chat and such an enlightening presentation. And thank you so much to all the schools and everyone at home who's joined us this afternoon. If you've missed any sessions from Curious About the Human Body and you really want to catch up, all of them have been recorded and you can watch them at Curious About at Glasgow Science Centre. curiousabout.glasgowsciencecentre.org. I'm going to get fired right after this. Well, thank you so much, Kirsty. And thank you again so much for joining us, everyone watching at home. Good afternoon and goodbye.
Bye, guys.
Bye.